Witam wszystkich w kolejnej audycji. Witam moderatorów, nowych i byłych moderatorów. Jeszcze nie zdążyłem zacząć, pojawiła się pierwsza wpłata. Tego jeszcze nie było. Dziękuję bardzo. Ciekawe, kto to jest. Kto się ukrywa pod pseudonimem Szary Pył? Jak myślicie? Na 20 koła. Była taka wpłata. Rybka to Patointeligent. Proszę się z nim połączyć. Szary Pył to agentka. Czyli może nie przyjmować, może zwracać te pieniądze, które otrzymuje od Szarego Pyłu. Bo potem jak przyjdą, wiecie, które czasy, to pokażą papiery na mnie, że brałem donaty od agentki. Przechodzimy do pierwszego materiału. Dzisiaj będziemy rozmawiać o bardzo ciekawych rzeczach. Antygrawitacja, zamrażanie ludzi, ale to nie wszystko. Nie będę wam zdradzał teraz wszystkich tematów. Pojawił się nasz stały widz Jacek Kaplon. Nie wpłacił nic, ale wymaga. Żeby zamawiać utwory, trzeba wpłacić minimum 20 zł.
The fascinating science of cryonics could give people a second chance at life. The whole idea of cryonics started with physics professor Robert Ettinger. He pioneered the movement with his seminal book, The Prospect for Immortality. He then went on to launch the Cryonics Institute. But just what is cryonics, and what does the Cryonics Institute do? Cryonics is a procedure that preserves the human body at low temperatures after death, in the hope it can be revived in the future. The process should begin immediately after a person is declared legally dead. Even though the heart has stopped beating, there's still brain function during this period, so a heart-lung resuscitator is used to stabilize the body and keep the brain supplied with blood and oxygen. The body is cooled in an ice bath to slow down metabolic demand and to protect both DNA and organ structure. Then anticoagulants and protective medications are injected into the body to stop the blood clotting during transit. The body is then packed in ice and transported to a cryonics facility. Once there, a process called vitrification begins, where the blood is replaced with a cryoprotectant antifreeze solution. This is done to prevent the cells from freezing and to stop ice crystals from forming around organs at extremely low temperatures. The body is then placed in a computerized vapor cooling chamber and cooled to negative 196 degrees Celsius. Once the body is properly cooled, the patient is transferred to a long-term cryostat storage container. Thousands of people are signed up for cryonics throughout the world, and the numbers are steadily growing. The Cryonics Institute is the world's largest provider of whole-body cryonics, They have performed more whole-body human and pet cryosuspensions than any other organization. The Cryonics Institute is also
Zamrozili większą ilość ludzi niż wszystkie inne firmy.
96 degrees Celsius. Once the body is properly cooled, the patient is transferred to a long-term cryostat storage container. Thousands of people are signed up for cryonics throughout the world, and the numbers are steadily growing. The Cryonics Institute is the world's largest provider of whole-body cryonics. They have performed more whole-body human and pet cryosuspensions than any other organization. The Cryonics Institute is also the most affordable cryonics company, with a whole-body suspension fee of only $28,000. Most people can afford this cost with simple life insurance.
Widzowie na czacie, ale piszemy tylko na temat, który poruszamy podczas audycji. Teraz omawiamy mrożenie ludzi.
Our organization is a member-owned nonprofit with open financial records. Suspension money collected is carefully invested in secure endowment like
Non-profit. Zamrażają ludzi i zamrozili więcej niż wszystkie inne firmy. Non-profit. A takie zamrożenie kosztuje minimum $28,000.
securities. The investment dividends earned from these investments fund perpetual storage and cryonics upkeep. This is how CI has operated since 1976. Some people prematurely dismiss cryonics because the technology to revive someone who has been cryogenically frozen does not exist yet. But they miss the point. Cryonics is really an ambulance ride now to a future hospital where that technology may someday exist. What does science say? There are now peer-reviewed scientific papers supporting cryonics, as well as many PhDs who have gone on record to support cryonics. Recent advances in stem cells, nanotechnology, and genetic engineering are proving that what was once considered impossible is becoming routine. Some have suggested that someday even aging itself may be halted or reversed. People once considered dead only 50 years ago today are revived with CPR and cardiac defibrillation. Cardiopulmonary resuscitation and organ transplant technology were once shunned by primitive dead only 50 years ago, today are revived with CPR and cardiac
Widzicie to? Ludzie, którzy umarli i byli zamrożeni 50 lat temu, teraz są odmrażani i przywracani do życia.
defibrillation. Cardiopulmonary resuscitation and organ transplant technology were once shunned by primitive thinkers, but today they are hailed as life-saving advances. If history has taught us anything, no one knows the future, and it is foolish to say what future technology will be impossible. Considering the alternative, which is certain death, cryonics is a rational scientific wager with little to lose and virtually everything to gain.
Zaraz będziemy wyjaśniać, w jaki sposób oni mrożą. Oni najpierw podmieniają wodę w człowieku i nie zamrażają człowieka w naturalnej postaci, tylko wypełnionego chemią.
Check out cryonics.org to learn more.
Anna Manna zapytała, ale to ten sam człowiek? I zobaczcie. Kryonika. Technika głębokiego ochładzania ciał ludzi i zwierząt, których współczesna medycyna nie jest w stanie utrzymać przy życiu i przechowywania w temperaturze ciekłego azotu minus 196 stopni Celsjusza z intencją przywrócenia do życia, kiedy medycyna wystarczająco się rozwinie. Słowo kryonika pochodzi od greckiego kryos, zimno. Przechowywanie ciała w temperaturze ciekłego azotu zatrzymuje wszelkie reakcje chemiczne w nim zachodzące. Ten stan to biostaza, w wypadku krioniki kriostaza. Przechowywanie zmarłego w stanie kriostazy jest dopuszczalne po stwierdzeniu zgonu, a obecnie już pracuje się nad tym, żeby można było ludzi, oni to nazywają tuż przed śmiercią, żeby można było ich zamrozić. Kryonicy są zdania, że osoby, czyli żywych będą mrozić niedługo, już pewnie to robią. Kryonicy są zdania, że osoby uważane za martwe według obecnych standardów niekoniecznie muszą być uważane za nieżywe według standardów, które będą obowiązywać w przyszłości. Nadziei na przywrócenie do życia kryonicy upatrują w zaawansowanej bioinżynierii, nanotechnologii molekularnej, nanomedycynie i możliwości przesłania informacji z mózgu do innego medium. Transfer umysłu, mind uploading. I zobaczcie to. Transfer umysłu, kopiowanie umysłu, emulacja mózgu. Hipotetyczny, rozumiecie, tyle nad tym pracują, to jest hipotetyczny proces skopiowania lub przeniesienia świadomości człowieka do komputera poprzez precyzyjne zmapowanie wszystkich połączeń neuronalnych w mózgu i wierne odtworzenie ich działania w symulacji komputerowej. To jest hipotetyczne. Symulacja taka mogłaby być częścią wirtualnej rzeczywistości, dostarczającej umysłowi bodźców i reagującej na jego zachowanie, bądź wchodzić w interakcję z rzeczywistym światem za pomocą zdalnie sterowanego robota lub biologicznego ciała. Dominuje przekonanie, że przywracanie do życia będzie się odbywać w kolejności pierwsi będą ostatnimi, a ostatni pierwszymi. Z uwagi na stosowanie coraz bardziej zaawansowanych procedur przy ochładzaniu pacjentów, pozwalających wyeliminować coraz więcej szkód, aż do całkowitej odwracalności procesu kryoniki. Przechodzimy do kolejnego materiału.
What is cryonics?
Witam wszystkich.
The cryonics idea is that people be frozen at very cold liquid nitrogen temperatures immediately after their legal death in the hope that they can be revived in the future when medical technology has improved and permits them to come back cured of what they died of.
What is the Cryonics Institute?
The Cryonics Institute is a non-profit membership corporation that exists to help its members make preparations for and then become frozen after they die. CI, as we call it for short, is in the Detroit area. We have over 1,000 members and more than 100 patients who are in frozen storage.
How did you get involved?
I got involved actually through my family. My father, Robert Ettinger, was the founder of the cryonics movement. Wrote the first book about cryonics that was sold on a wide scale, The Prospect of Immortality. And I learned about it at the dinner table. In fact,
Nieśmiertelność, padło to słowo, nieśmiertelność, to jest to, nad czym oni pracują.
when I was 15, my father was in California for the freezing of the first human being, and local television stations here in Detroit wanted somebody to comment, and I ended up going on TV and being the commentator at the age of 15. So I've been talking about the cryonics idea now for about 45 years.
How did your father come up with the idea?
My father's history is kind of interesting because it illustrates, I think, a lot of the premises behind cryonics. My father was an infantry lieutenant in World War II, and he was very badly wounded. His legs were riddled with shrapnel as he was standing up to try to sight the artillery during the Battle of the Bulge. And it was touch and go for him for quite a while.
Ktoś napisał, człowiek wygląda jak hybryd. Możliwe, że on jest swoim ojcem.
At first, some of the doctors thought he might die, and then later thought that his legs would have to be amputated. But my grandfather, his father, searched out what was then cutting-edge medical technology in terms of bone grafts, and they were able to save my father's legs. And the lesson that taught my father is that there could be a big difference between yesterday's medicine and tomorrow's medicine in terms of saving your life. My father then, in the course of the next few years, which he spent in and out of hospitals, learned about some of the early research in cryobiology, in the preservation through freezing of organisms and the use of so-called cryoprotective chemicals to protect against freezing damage. And my father thought, well, the obvious thing is sooner or later we will freeze people and give them a chance to come back in the future. And he waited for that to happen. And it didn't. And then ultimately he wrote his book, which was published in the early 1960s to advocate the idea. Even later, he then founded the Cryonics Institute, which is the organization that I'm a member of today, that he was the longtime president of, and where he is stored and frozen today.
Is your father still alive?
My father died at 92 just a couple of years ago. He had a long life, but he wanted a longer one, and hopefully he will have a longer one.
Why would someone want to be frozen at 92?
Well, you know, some people might say if they're 20 or 30 or 40, well, 90, that sounds like plenty long life. And I think my father would have said, that sounds great until you're 90. And my father enjoyed his life, wanted to live longer, wanted to see the future. In fact, my father was looking forward, if he was revived, to doing things he'd never been able to do. For example, because of his war injuries, he was never able to ski. He said to me in his last year of his life that he hoped he could become revived and then get a chance to ski for the first time.
Zobaczcie, kochani, polecam wam taki film, ale pewnie większość z was go zna, ponieważ oglądają mnie widzowie, którzy niejedno już widzieli. To tylko policja. Witam wszystkich. Lecimy dalej. I zobaczcie tu, Johnny Mnemonic. Amerykańsko-kanadyjski film fabularny science fiction z 1995 roku. Film został nakręcony według cyberpunkowego opowiadania Williama Gibsona pod tym samym tytułem. Fabuła filmu jest osadzona w świecie roku 2021. Opowiada historię człowieka, który dzięki wszczepionemu implantowi pamięci Trudni się przełożeniem w nim informacji. Połowa ludzkości cierpi na tajemniczą, nieuleczalną chorobę NAS. Podczas jednego z transportów danych Johnny Mnemonik wpada w wielkie tarapaty. Dane chce przechwycić Yakuza. Okazuje się, że dane zawierają informacje dotyczące lekarstwa na NAS, a firma je produkująca stara się za wszelką cenę nie dopuścić do ich upublicznienia. Johnny Mnemonik, 95 rok.
After that, the body continues to be cooled down, first to dry ice, then to liquid nitrogen temperatures, CI agents, and CI has chosen those agents based on research in the field and the research it's commissioned, and has over time improved capsules.
What's the freezing process?
The process has a number of stages. At the first stage, it's very important to begin to cool the body down using ice and water cooled with ice as soon as possible after legal death, and CI.
Czyli nie mówią już o śmierci biologicznej, tylko o śmierci prawnej. Ktoś musi umrzeć na papierze. Dlatego wymyślili coś takiego jak śmierć mózgu. Człowiek żyje, powiedzą, że to była śmierć mózgu i szybko do zamrażarki.
CI has some equipment for patients who are on hand that helps that occur, equipment designed by CI. At later stages then, the blood is replaced by cryoprotective agents, and CI has chosen those agents based on research in the field and the research it's commissioned, and has over time improved choices and improved the technology in terms of those cryoprotective agents that are used. After that, the body continues to be cooled down, first to dry ice, then to liquid nitrogen temperatures. CI has a computer-controlled cooling box that...
Ale oni mogą dać ci zastrzyk. Ty będziesz sobie spał, czy spała. Ktoś wpisze na karcie pacjenta, że to jest śmierć mózgu i cię zamrażają. A potem cię odmrożą w innym miejscu, wszczepią ci umysł kogoś innego.
Carefully controls and monitors the body so that it is cooled down to liquid nitrogen temperatures in a deliberate way so as to minimize any damage through that process. And then ultimately, the bodies are stored in cryocapsules that have been designed and improved by CI for the maximum reliability.
I non-profit oni takie kapsuły budują. Zapytajcie się, ile kosztuje skonstruowanie takiej kapsuły.
And also the maximum efficiency, so that these capsules have very little boil off of liquid nitrogen over time, and therefore are extremely efficient, and the cost of maintenance is extremely low.
What if I change my mind? Can I get my money back?
Well, CI, as I've indicated, wants to protect its patients and wants to protect its financial stability. And both those things mean that once a patient is frozen, if your relative decides they change their mind and they want to unfreeze you, we're not going to let them do that. They'll have to go to court to try to get that done, and our contract makes that clear. We think that protects you as the patient, and it protects CI so that once CI has expended funds on a patient, it doesn't have to return.
Jak cię zamrożą, to nawet twoja rodzina nie może cię odmrozić. Sąd ci nie pomoże.
Those funds. However, before the freezing process is begun for a patient, before CI begins to do things to freeze a patient and to prepare for freezing a patient, funds usually aren't even paid to CI, and therefore there's nothing to be refunded. Typically, if money is funded through life insurance policy and that funding is in place and CI knows it, we proceed, if someone dies, to freeze the patient. On the other hand, if somebody signs up for CI, signs a contract, 2 years from now decides they no longer want to be frozen, and simply changes the beneficiary on their life insurance policy and lets CI know, then that patient will no longer be funded and CI gets no money. So this does not require payments in advance to CI. Some members choose to do that, and those payments are refundable. Most do not. They simply take steps so that the money is available to CI, and those steps are always revocable.
Why do you want more people involved in cryonics?
You know, at least speaking for myself, I'm not interested in saving the world. I'm interested in saving myself and my family. But you need a lot of people working together to save yourself and your family. And so people in cryonics are trying to bolster and grow the cryonics movement so we can all work together and increase our chances of having a successful, stable organization and being revived in the future.
For someone who is not old and sick, what's the hurry?
Well, again, there's no hurry unless you suddenly get sick and die unexpectedly. People sometimes die of problems that are foreseeable and take a long time, and then they have time to prepare. People sometimes, even then, die slowly, but because they're old and sick, they're feeble and it's harder for them to make the preparations that need to be made for cryonics. People also die unexpectedly of heart attacks, of accidents, of lots of things that they could not anticipate. And I think the answer is that you need to make arrangements for cryonics, if you believe in cryonics, when you're healthy, so that you are protected and your family's protected if something does occur. I think I'm vigorous. I get up and exercise every morning. I intend to be here a long time, but I also am prepared and have my contract signed and my arrangements made so that just in case I'm wrong, I am covered in terms of being cryonically preserved. And for
Już jest gotowy na to, żeby go zamrozili. Chociaż planuje żyć jak najdłużej, ale już jest gotowy na zamrażarkę.
people who think cryonics makes sense, that's the prudent thing to do, we think.
What if someone wants to learn more?
The best place to learn more is to go to CI's website, cryonics.org. There's a lot of information there, but you can also certainly call CI, talk to members. There are always people available to talk to you. I am among many others. You can come to the organization and view the facility. CI is an open book, and we're happy to talk to new members and gaining new members all the time.
Any final thoughts?
I think the most important thing I'd emphasize yet again is being prepared, because I'm convinced there are a lot of people out there who've heard of the cryonics idea, say it makes sense. It's something I'll worry about in the future. It's a little radical. I think I'd like to do it, but there's no hurry. And the problem is sometimes you don't know when there's a hurry. And so I would say don't put it off. Make preparations now. Work with us so that you can be protected and your family can be protected.
Thank you, David. That was very interesting.
Thank you.
Dziękujemy. I co myślicie? Czy dalibyście się zamrozić? Ten materiał ma ponad 7 lat. Bardzo mało wyświetleń, bardzo mało komentarzy. Witamy Mariam. Widzę, że jest Jola. Krioprezerwacja. Kriokonserwacja. Proces, w którym komórki lub tkanki są przechowywane w ujemnej temperaturze, zwykle minus 196 stopni Celsjusza. Punkt wrzenia ciekłego azotu. W tak niskiej temperaturze zatrzymuje się wszelka aktywność biologiczna, łącznie z biochemicznymi reakcjami prowadzącymi do śmierci komórkowej. Jednakże bez użycia mieszanin witryfikujących przechowywane komórki ulegają uszkodzeniom związanym z niską temperaturą lub ponownym ogrzaniem do temperatury pokojowej. Tutaj jeszcze piszą o starych metodach. Ja mam linki na temat nowych metod, które powodują, że kryształki się nie tworzą. Przechodzimy do kolejnego materiału. Przyszłość, czyli ludzie w lodówkach, zostawcie łapkę w górę. Lodówki w kosmosie. Nieśmiertelność. Wirtualna, sztuczna rzeczywistość, nieśmiertelność, przyszłość, życie w lodówkach. Dzięki Kamil. Kamil właśnie wpłacił kolejne 20 zł, to już trzeci raz, to razem 60. Zaraz to muszę wszystko pozmieniać.
The process of cryopreservation begins once the patient is pronounced legally dead. The patient
Nie dla psa kiełbasa, coś mi tutaj przeskoczyło. Nagle miałem media playera na 2 ekranach. Dzieją się dziwne rzeczy z tym komputerem. I znowu tutaj zaczynają od tego, poczekajcie chwilę, walczę z media playerem.
The process of cryopreservation begins
Już.
once the patient is pronounced legally dead.
Udało się.
The patient will be placed inside of an ice bath that's filled with water and ice. A pump will pump cold water over the patient's body and primarily the head.
Człowiek będzie oblewany lodowatą wodą i lodem, szczególnie głowa. To wszystko oczywiście, kiedy będzie uznany za nieżywego, nie kiedy będzie nie żył, tylko kiedy będzie prawnie nieżywy.
To keep the brain cold.
Najważniejsze, żeby schłodzić mózg.
A breathing tube will be inserted into the lungs to keep the blood oxygenated, and an automatic chest compressor will
Rura będzie wciśnięta przez usta, żeby dotleniać krew.
pump the blood throughout the body, primarily to the brain. During this time, medications will
Chyba kompresor będzie pompował krew.
also be introduced into the body that thin the blood and the aid in the cooling process. The chest will be opened and the blood will be pumped
Klatka piersiowa będzie rozwiercana.
out of the body and replaced with a cooling solution.
Płyny będą wysysane i zastępowane płynem chłodniczym.
Once the patient arrives at the facility, they will be placed onto a table where the cooling solution is replaced with the cryoprotectant solution.
Po przywiezieniu do nich na tym stole znowu wypompują ten płyn chłodniczy i wpompują specjalny
Placed with the cryoprotectant solution.
specjalny płyn Cryoprotective. Płyn, który będzie chronił przed mrożeniem.
Perfusing the brain with cryoprotectant will prevent freezing damage and cause the brain to be vitrified once the patient is placed in liquid nitrogen. The patient will be wrapped inside of a sleeping bag and tied to a wooden board.
Czyli Emilka twierdzi, że to nie istnieje.
Inside of a computer-controlled cooling unit, the patient will be cooled with liquid nitrogen to minus 196 degrees Celsius over the course of about 5 days.
Tutaj przy wściekłym azocie będą chłodzić przez 5 dni.
The patient will be hoisted up above the cryostats that are about 10 feet tall, each of which hold 6 patients.
W każdej takiej beczce trzyma się 6 zamrożonych ludzi.
The patients will be placed inside of the cryostats face down so that if there is any excess liquid nitrogen boil off, the brain will not be affected. The cryostats are periodically refilled with liquid nitrogen. The walls of the cryostats are void of air to insulate the patients, and air is periodically pumped out of the walls of the cryostats. Eventually, the patients expect to be reanimated in the future.
I co myślicie o tej technologii? Czy namówiłem was? Trzeba próbować wszystkiego. YSP pyta, po co to? Rozmawiamy o mrożeniu ludzi. Za chwilę będziemy poruszać temat antygrawitacji. To jest non-profit. Pewnie są firmy, które dopłacają do tego. Twoja rodzina jeszcze dostaje pieniądze. I zobaczcie, co wymyśliło NASA.
There's a new high-tech device that will make you literally feel like you're walking on the moon.
Used to treat injuries, it's out of this world.
It's called the Ultra G, and it's nothing short of amazing.
Spróbuję puścić z YouTube'a. Będziecie wtedy mieli tłumaczenie. I już mam stronę. Czytam, co piszecie. Ochotnik koronkowej strzykawki podobno niestety jest po drugiej stronie. Nie mogę znaleźć tego filmu. Już mam. Przepraszam, że musicie czekać. Ale nie wszystko tu wygląda tak, jak powinno. Jeszcze tylko napisy.
There's a new high-tech device that will make you literally feel like you're walking on the moon.
Used to treat injuries, it's out of this world.
It's called the Ultra G, and it's nothing short of amazing.
Feels like you're on air. Feels light.
The device, developed by NASA engineers, allows people with joint problems to exercise stress-free in an anti-gravity environment.
You're zipped into special pants, then your lower body is locked into airtight surroundings.
With customized calibrations, patients can walk between 20 to 100% of their normal body weight.
Just look at her go, running a mile in just over 9 minutes. Even more impressive, Mirtha Maddox is injured. She has a torn hamstring, but the Ultra G allows her to work through her injury.
I was constantly still on the ground 3 or 4 days a week. The injury would not have time to rest, and I would not be able to still run.
The Ultra G is kind of the big bubble. You have to wear these special pants. We call them a tutu. It was easier to move my body. I felt I could walk a little better after, because I felt like I was flying.
When I blew out my knee, the weight started going on, vicious cycle. Her weight loss hit a plateau until she became one of the latest people to try space-age technology created by NASA. It was amazing. The first day I got on it, I did about 2.5, 2.5.
Kosmiczna technologia wynaleziona przez NASA, taki namiot, w którym się staje i zabiera człowiekowi do 80% jego wagi. Czyli jak ktoś waży 50, to na tej bieżni waży tylko 10. Jego nogi czują się, jakby ważył 10 kg.
Miles an hour for 30 minutes. Weight loss brought Angel from a size 28 to a 22.
This is pretty amazing. Still doesn't restrict your movement at all, and allows me to really get some training without all the pounding on my ankle right away.
As athletes, what they saw themselves being able to do in the recovery process and just the incremental improvement that they saw each and every day. We had people just wanting to push the envelope each day and wanting to get their body weight percentage up. They felt good and they wanted to continue to fly through the rehab process.
I've been rehabbing now for about a month and a half.
So what are you allowed to do?
Now starting to do a little bit more things, walking on the Alter G, doing a little bit of the elliptical.
When I think of the Alter G, the first word that comes to mind is effectiveness. And knowing that I came back and playing soccer after 6 months, after knowing that an injury like this would take me 8 to 12 months, I have no doubt in my mind that anybody can have those kind of results. As far as I'm concerned, I feel as though the Alter G should be in every rehab and training facility.
That's it. I'm not even helping you. I know. You're in a state of shock.
Yeah, no, wonderful.
My gait is better, it's longer, it's more comfortable, I stand up more, and I could tell immediately that it was going to be helpful, or anything's possible.
Hi, I'm Jimmy, and I'm going to show you how to operate the Alter G anti-gravity treadmill. The first thing you want to do is come over, step into the elastic shorts made exclusively for the Alter G. Once your shorts are on, you'll walk through the back of the Alter G into the circular cockpit. Bending down, you'll grab the cockpit handlebars, sliding them up to your hips. Once in line with your hips, you will grab the locking mechanism, sliding it into place. You'll find your zipper on your shorts, goes in line with the zipper on the bag. Going all the way around, creating the seal in the bag. Once the locking mechanism is in place, the seal is created through the zipper. You want to take the safety strap and place it around your wrist. Once you have that completed, you want to begin the calibration process. You want to cross your arms and remain still. You'll feel the air fill up around your waist in the bag. When completed, the green light will go from calibrating to ready. When the green light indicates ready, you may then take advantage of the features of the AlterG anti-gravity treadmill, beginning with speed. In 0.1 increments, you may go all the way up to 12 miles an hour in forward, 3 miles an hour in reverse. There is also an incline feature. The display panel also shows time, distance, incline percentage, calories, heart rate, and pace. For now, we'll go down to 80% of my body weight. Increasing speed. One of the great features of the AlterG is the ability for the physical therapist to see their patient move inside the AlterG. Whether it be walking or running, they can see their gait and how they're moving. When completing your workout, you want to reduce speed, back down to 0, then press stop. That will stop the treadmill and also deflate the bag. Once that has occurred, you will unzip yourself from the bag, take the locking mechanism, slide it to the left, lowering the cockpit. Once the cockpit is lowered, you'll step out of the AlterG through the back. And I hope you enjoyed the workout.
I lecimy dalej. Teraz trochę grubsze informacje.
Imagine if you could change what's possible in rehab and training. If you could alter the forces of gravity precisely, consistently, and safely. Imagine if you could change what's possible in rehab and training. If you could alter the forces of gravity precisely, consistently, and safely. Imagine if you had the power to recover sooner and work out smarter. Imagine if you could walk on air. If you had the freedom to run again, to exercise with less impact, to move naturally, pain-free, without the fear of falling. Imagine if you could defy limits and be your best you. AlterG. Defy gravity. Defy limits.
Czym jest grawitacja? Czy istnieje? Piszcie, co myślicie. Z tego co wiem, taki sprzęt kosztuje 150 000 złotych. $30 000 funtów. I lecimy dalej. Super, że jesteście. Zostawcie łapki w górę. Nie zmuszam nikogo do wpłat, ale 2 osoby już płaciły. Szary Pył i Kamil.
Called neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are released from the end of an axon in response to an electrical spike called an action potential. When a cell receives enough of the right signals called neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are released from the end of an axon in response to an electrical spike called an action potential. When a cell receives enough of the right kind of neurotransmitter input, a chain reaction is triggered that causes an action potential to fire, and the neuron to in turn relay messages to its own downstream synapses. Action potentials produce an electric field that spreads from the neuron and can be detected by placing electrodes nearby, allowing recording of the information represented by a neuron.
Hello, everybody. So that video was not Shutterstock. That was actually Neuralink. So that's actual video from the company. So if you want to get a sense for what it's like to work at Neuralink, that video is indicative of the atmosphere of Neuralink. It's an incredibly talented team, and you're going to hear a lot from them tonight. So we're going to actually go quite into depth on what we're doing, why we're doing, how we're doing it. And I'm just incredibly impressed with the caliber of talent at Neuralink. And in fact, the main reason for doing this presentation is recruiting. So we really want to have the best talent in the world come and work at Neuralink. Anyone that's interested in trying to solve this problem. And that's actually the primary purpose for this presentation. So, okay. So the why of Neuralink, just to go over it, is I think it's important for us to address brain-related diseases. Everyone, if you survive cancer and heart disease, the odds are that you will have some brain-related disorder. So it'll be like Alzheimer's or dementia. And if you don't, friends and family will for sure. And I think unless we have some sort of brain-machine interface that can solve brain ailments of all kinds, whether it's an accident or congenital or any kind of brain-related disorder, or a spinal disorder. If you know somebody who's broken their neck or broken their spine, we can solve that with a chip. And this is something that I think most people don't quite understand yet. And we're going to go over in detail how this is possible.
Jak ktoś sobie złamie kręgosłup, to będą mogli rozwiązać ten problem chipem. Wszystko dla chorych. Wszystko, co robią, robią dla chorych, żeby im pomóc.
But I think there's an incredible amount we can do to solve brain disorders, damage, and all this will occur actually, I think, quite slowly. So I do want to emphasize that it's not going to be like suddenly Neuralink will have this incredible neural lace and start taking over people's brains. Okay. It will take a long time. So you'll see it coming. So getting FDA approval for implantable or devices of any kind is quite difficult, and this will be a slow process where we will gradually increase the issues that we solve until ultimately we can do a full brain-machine interface, meaning that we can ultimately. Yeah, this is going to sound pretty weird, but achieve a sort of symbiosis with artificial intelligence. So, but this is not a mandatory thing. This is a thing that you can choose to have if you want. And this is something I think that's going to be really important at a civilization level scale. So, and I've said a lot about AI over the years. But I think even in a benign AI scenario, we will be left behind. And so, and hopefully it is a benign scenario. But I think with a high bandwidth brain-machine interface, I think we can actually go along for the ride. And we can effectively have the option of merging with AI. I think this is extremely important. And if you think about your limbic system and your cortex, your limbic system is kind of your primal needs and wants, and it's like where a lot of your emotions are coming from. And then the cortex is like the thinking, planning part of your brain. And I haven't met anyone who wants to get rid of either the cortex or the limbic system. So clearly they work together well. Even though your cortex is in principle far smarter than your limbic system, everybody wants to keep the limbic system and their cortex.
Jak ktoś dymi na czacie, to zapominamy o powiązaniach rodzinnych i wyciszamy.
So hopefully we can have a tertiary layer, which is the kind of a digital superintelligence layer. And in fact, you already have this layer. So it's your phone and your laptop. And the constraint is just how well you interface, the input and output speed. So the output speed is especially slow since most people are typing with thumbs these days. So you have a very slow output speed. Your input speed is much faster due to vision. But the thing that will ultimately constrain our ability to be symbiotic with AI is bandwidth. So in the limit, after solving a bunch of brain-related diseases, there is the existential, it's mitigation of the existential threat of AI. Or, yeah, this is the point of it. So creating a well-aligned future, that's the idea.
Composed of nearly 100 billion cells called neurons. Neurons come in many complex shapes, but generally they have a dendritic arbor, a cell body called a soma, and an axon. The neurons of your brain connect to form a large network through axon-dendrite junctions called synapses. At these connection points, neurons communicate with each other using chemical signals called neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are released from the end of an axon in response to an electrical spike called an action potential. When a cell receives enough of the right kind of neurotransmitter input, a chain reaction is triggered that causes an action potential to fire, and the neuron to in turn relay messages to its own downstream synapses. Action potentials produce an electric field that spreads from the neuron and can be detected by placing electrodes nearby, allowing recording of the information represented by a neuron.
We thought we'd play that twice. It's so good you have to play it twice. Well, I think like a lot of people in the audience, there's a wide range of knowledge about neurons. I mean, some people view the brain as like this incredibly mystical thing that you cannot interface with the brain, and then some people are aware of deep brain stimulation, such as occurs for Parkinson's patients. So trying to address the broad range of understanding. I mean, neurons, essentially, there's that whole idea, what if we were just a brain in a vat? This is often posed by philosophers, except we are a brain in a vat, and that's it.
Przepraszam was za czajnik. Tutaj od Czuba napisał, Elon Musk równa się największy zdrajca, powiedział, że jest przeciwnikiem AI, a tak naprawdę jest jednym z głównych osób popychających technologię tego typu. No, ludzie jeszcze mu płacą za pieniądze, kupują od niego Tesle niepełnosprawne i dopiero ludzie uczą te Tesle. Każdy update to miliony przejechanych godzin Tesli. I prawdziwi ludzie, czyli użytkownicy, uczą system sztucznej inteligencji, tak jak użytkownicy Google'a uczą sztuczną inteligencję Google'a. Jak mówić po polsku, jak pisać po polsku, co jest na obrazku.
That vat is our skull. Everything that you perceive, feel, hear, think, it's all action potentials. It's all it's neural spikes. And it feels so real. It feels very real. But these are all impulses from neurons, what's called a spike. And our goal is to record from and stimulate spikes in neurons and do so in a way that is orders of magnitude more than anything that's been done to date, and safe and good enough that you can. It's not like a major operation. It's sort of equivalent to sort of a LASIK type of thing. So where you can sort of sit down, machines.
Kochani, biedny łodzianin wpłacił trzeci raz 20 zł. To już trzecia wpłata dzisiaj, a dopiero 72 minuty streama.
This thing, and you can walk away within a few hours. And that's it. And you're not even in a hospital. So, like there's basically.
Podziękujcie biednemu łodzianinowi.
In terms of key points that are worth taking away, the system that we designed in version 1 is capable of on the order of 10,000 electrodes. So each chip, which is 4 by 4 millimeters, is capable of 1,000 electrodes, or has 1,000 electrodes, and we think doing up to 10 is feasible. So this is in contrast to the best FDA-approved system, which is like a Parkinson's deep brain stimulation thing, which would have on the order of 10 electrodes. So
All right. As you can see, Gertrude is healthy and happy. You can just, if you look closely, you can just barely see the scar where the implant was put in. And now let's take a look at the real-time data that's being transmitted from Gertrude's Neuralink implant. So what you're seeing there are all 1,024 channels, and each of those dots is a spike. And
1024 kanały, bezprzewodowy przesył danych z mózgu świni.
This Neuralink is implanted in the region of the brain that where the snout is located, which is actually quite a large part of a pig's brain. And so when you touch Gertrude's snout, you can see there's a whole bunch more neurons that fire, and that sound you hear is a collection of neural spikes. So every time that the snout is touched, the Neuralink device in her head is transmitting the data that.
Oni już w tym momencie są w stanie do odpowiedniej myśli przyporządkować daną informację lub dźwięk i kiedy my o czymś pomyślimy, gdzieś tam w odpowiednim miejscu zapali się czerwona lampka. I człowiek będzie przyporządkowany do sprawdzenia, o czym on myślał, co on planuje. Trzeba to przejrzeć. Trzeba przejrzeć jego ostatnie 15 minut myśli. To nie są żarty.
Transmitting the data that she is sensing, and we're seeing it on the screen. I think this is incredibly profound. Here you have a healthy, happy pig with an implant, doing great.
Szczęśliwa świnia z implantem maska.
The system, even in version 1 that we're going to unveil today, is capable of 1,000 times more electrodes than the best system out there, and they're all read and write. So this is really quite, I mean, for something to be 1,000 times more than what is publicly approved is quite a big difference. And this will get better with subsequent versions. Now this slide may seem a little generic, because like everything's got robots, electronics, and algorithms at this point, but not threads. So the I feel like I'm in transcendence.
Za dużo zajarał.
Actually, I was in transcendence. So there's very tiny threads that are about a tenth, roughly, of the cross-sectional area of a human hair. So they're extremely tiny threads. In fact, the threads that we have, like I said, even in version 1, are about the same size as a neuron. So if you're going to go stick something in your brain, you want it to not be giant, you want it to be tiny, and to be approximately on par with the things that are already there, the neurons. So this is about the size of a neuron.
Jak chcesz coś sobie wsadzić do głowy, no to musi być malutkie. Taki żart w stylu Elona Muska.
Each thread. And then you really need this to be done with a robot because it's very tiny and it needs to be very precise. So you don't want to pierce a blood vessel. So so each thread, the robot looks sort of basically through a microscope and inserts each electrode specifically, bypassing any vasculature, any kind of like blood vessel and making sure that it can be inserted without causing trauma or minimal trauma. Yeah, it's not zero, but you won't notice it. That's the important part. You won't yeah, you won't feel a thing. Yeah, anyways, obviously algorithms. So just to give you a sense of scale, this is how tiny the threads are. That is not even a big finger, that is a small finger. So these threads.
I to nawet nie jest duży palec, to jest mały palec i to ich bardzo śmieszy. Wszyscy tam na widowni, ci naukowcy, nazwijmy ich to, w Silicon Valley, wszyscy się śmieją, kiedy on o tym mówi, zobaczcie.
Small finger. So these threads are just like I said, way smaller than a hair, and there's 1,000 of them. And this is what the robot looks like. It's sort of quite a complex device, but it all comes down to a very tiny point. So we want to just like, you see the robot on the left, and then what looks like the needles for insertion next to a penny, but in fact the actual needle that gets inserted is way tinier. It's that little tiny thing at where the arrow is pointing. That's actually the size of the needle. It's about 24 microns in diameter. Extremely small. It's so small you can't really even see it in the picture with the penny. And then this is your brain on uranium. No, that's not really. That's agar. So you can get a sense for the robot doing the electrode insertion. That's a very zoomed in view. So they're all very tiny, and the robot is very selectively applying them very delicately. And then.
Drodzy widzowie, oko orła wpłaciło 20 zł, to razem już 120 od oko orła. Ciekawe, kto to jest.
This is what the chip looks like. So, action potentials.
Dziękuję oku.
So each one of those represents one electrode. So there would be up to 10,000 of these lines. Yeah. So I guess it's always difficult to say. There's going to be there's a lot more in this presentation. So in terms of things that I think are important to bear in mind, this I think has a very good purpose, which is to cure important diseases, and ultimately to help secure humanity's future as a civilization relative to AI. The threads are very tiny, and there's a lot of them, and they're very carefully placed. And the operation on a per chip basis, it involves just a 2 millimeter incision, which is dilated to 8 millimeters, and then the chip is placed through that, and then it goes back to being 2 millimeters, and you can basically glue it shut. You don't even need a stitch. So, and then the interface to the chip is wireless. So you have no wires poking out of your head. Very, very important. So it's basically Bluetooth to your phone.
Mózg połączony Bluetoothem.
So we'll have to watch the App Store updates for that one. Make sure we don't have a driver issue. Updating.
To są żarty Elona Muska, który właśnie powiedział, że mając chipa w mózgu, trzeba będzie uważać na apki w Apple Store, żeby nie miały problemów ze sterownikiem.
But the key is like this is something that is going to be not stressful. As our goal is not stressful to put in. Should work well, hopefully. We'll check it out very carefully before it becomes obviously FDA approved, and it's wireless. So this I think has tremendous potential, and we hope to have this aspirationally in a human patient before the end of next year. So this is not far. And then, as I mentioned earlier, this is the main purpose of this presentation is recruiting, and we need very talented people in all these areas. So it's a lot of very talented people are needed to make this ultimately successful. And then,
jeżeli szukacie
speaking of
pracy,
talented
to
people, let me hand it over.
Elon Musk szuka ludzi.
To Max. Yeah.
I need a clicker. Thank you. Thank you. I'm Max Hodak. I'm the president of Neuralink. I remember a couple years ago when
Max Hodak.
We started talking about the idea of Neuralink and that there might be a company and whether this was even a good idea. I remember my first reaction was that I wasn't sure that this actually was a good idea, that the technology was there yet. And I think Elon has this incredible optimism where he'll pierce through these imagined constraints and show you that really a lot more is possible than you really think is today. And you have to be very careful telling him that something's impossible. It better be limited by a law of physics or you're going to end up looking stupid. And so I've wanting to build a neural interface has really been like a
O wiele więcej jest możliwe, niż ci się wydaje. Starajcie się wyłapywać takie przekazy.
central goal of my life for basically as long as I can remember. I think like we talk about AI being potentially the last invention that we have. I think that a high bandwidth BMI might be like really the first invention in many ways of like the next chapter of us. It's just really, like as Elon alluded to earlier, everything about your experience, your thoughts, your memories, it's all in your brain and represented in the firing statistics of action potentials. So, all right, so just what is a BMI? And we'll go through this fairly quickly, I think. So you start with hopefully a brain and a machine. But the machine is just a stand-in for the outside world. It could be another brain, it could be software, it could be a robotic arm. But you want to receive energy from that world and impart through the senses like vision and audition and impart energy back into the world through things like motor control. And that language that they use to communicate, putting aside the interface hardware for a second, it's very important to understand what that is, because people ask like, oh, can I talk to my dog, or can I do these things? But it's important to understand what that language is. And that language, in the most general sense, is information. To a first approximation, everything is information. But we just consider here the information represented in neurons. And so consider two like toy neurons. One, so these lines are imagined action potentials. And so imagine a neuron that fires very regularly, like a metronome. Like this doesn't tell us anything. There's no information conveyed in this signal. We don't learn anything from it. On the opposite end of the spectrum, imagine a neuron that fires completely randomly. This also doesn't tell us anything. This also doesn't carry any information. Now we know that these two degenerate cases are not what neurons do, because if you fit a model from recorded neural activity to behavior of things like a cursor of a patient or a subject that's implanted, and you correlate these, then you can build a graph that looks like this. And this is a figure from a classic paper in this field, from like the academic heritage of this field from 2003. I think that actually some of the authors of this paper are in the audience today. And you can see the x-axis is number of neurons, and the r is the goodness of fit. And you can see that as you add neurons, the quality of the model improves. This tells us that neurons and their spike trains carry information about things. Here it asymptotes fairly quickly. That's because what they were fitting here was just 2D cursor control, which has simple dynamics. And if you have tasks that are more complicated, then you need more neurons. So the classic definition of information is a difference that makes a difference. It's just some piece of information or knowledge that tells you something. It's like a very abstract concept, but it's such, like information theory is such a deep rabbit hole. If you haven't seen it before, the original paper, Mathematical Theory of Communication, is like, it's very readable. I highly recommend it. You'll start seeing information everywhere. It will totally change the way you view the world because the world is information, as we've talked about before. And understanding information also gets this question of, well, why do you have to have an implantable device? Why don't you have EEG or a wearable or an optical thing? And the answer, of course, is like, well, these are different information carriers, and what information are they carrying? And we know that, like, if you open a back issue of the Journal of Neuroscience and you want to understand how some species of bird encodes sound localization or something, you'll find a discussion of spikes. And we, as far as we know, everything that we care about is found in the statistics of spikes. So that's what we focus on. There are other things like fMRI or EEG. These are different information carriers carrying different information, which we believe is impoverished relative to spikes. I think that's the scientific consensus. And so the question for all these different things is, well, what information is found in your carrier? We focus on spikes. That means we have to be inside the brain because there's no ceiling that we're aware of on that with respect to that like grand vision of your perception, your thoughts, everything, like motor output, re-embodying lost limbs. And so why does that mean that you have to be inside the brain? So you want spikes. Well, people have studied, if you take a neuron and you put in a...
I tu przerwiemy na chwilę. Zobaczymy, kim jest Max. Widzę, że zainteresowaliście się Maxem Chodakiem. Ja tu zrobiłem na szybko takie tłumaczenie z jego oficjalnej strony, z jego oficjalnego CV. I zobaczcie, co tu można przeczytać. Max Chodak. Edukacja BSE, Inżynieria Biomedyczna, Duke University, 2012. Prezes Neuralinku od 2017 do teraz. Neuralink opracowuje najbardziej zaawansowane na świecie interfejsy mózg-maszyna.
And so why does that mean that you have to be inside the brain? So you want spikes. Well, people have studied, if you take a neuron and you put an electrode on that specific neuron, so you have a ground truth electrical potential of that one neuron, and then you place an extracellular electrode nearby, which is what our electrodes in the Utah array and other people are like. We're not in the cell, we're near the cells. And then you measure how far away from a neuron can you be when you know what the ground truth spiking activity is, can you no longer see the spikes? And it turns out that the answer is about 60 microns, which is like 0.06. It's very small. It's a lot less than a millimeter. So you have to be firmly under the skull. Like there's no wearable that is going to get you spikes.
Nie mógł im powiedzieć, że to było 0,06 mm, bo nie zrozumieliby, bo to byli tylko najinteligentniejsi ludzie w Stanach Zjednoczonych.
This is a physics constraint as far as we're aware. And so now I just want to talk about briefly that Neuralink didn't come out of nowhere. There's a long academic heritage of research here. The cochlear implant has reached millions of patients since the 50s for deaf patients. Over 100,000 patients have received deep brain stimulation for Parkinson's and essential tremor and dystonia, and now other indications. And about 20 patients have received the Utah array, which is a little 100 electrode rigid metal silicon device And even though it has very few channels, they've been able to do some really cool stuff with it. There's videos on YouTube of brain gate patients doing things like controlling tablet computers or even texting each other through Utah arrays just from the small number of electrodes. And so many of the people on the team at Neuralink came from this academic work. I got my start working in a lab at Duke University studying how mappings between brain and like the screen space change. So if you make it so that the joystick goes, like the cursor goes sideways when you push forward instead of up, like how does the brain change that representation? So the point is that there are lots of people that have been looking at this problem from lots of angles for decades, and we're in the greatest sense building on the shoulders of giants here. And so the question is, why not use one of those devices? Why not use a Utah array or a deep brain stimulator implanted pulse generator? And it's just, in the Utah array case, the rigid sharp metal electrodes produce a fairly strong immune response. And this doesn't end up hurting the patient, but it does mean that you lose the ability to record single spikes over some period of time, usually between 1 and a couple years. There's also a big percutaneous connector through the scalp. So you need to plug in big external electronics, and you're never really confident that the risk of infection is gone for the duration that you have the implant. Deep brain stimulators solve a very different type of problem. They are very effective for some Parkinson's patients, but they have only a couple electrodes, and they're really geared towards injecting large amounts of current, not recording single spikes. So they're really a very different, the DBS is really just a very different type of platform for a very different type of problem. So we had to go back to the drawing board and start over to build something that met the goals that Elon laid out for us. We knew, as Elon mentioned, that whatever we built, we wanted it to be completely wireless. We didn't want any connectors or wires coming through the skin. It had to be something that would last for a long period of time, not something that you'd have to take out at 2, 3, or 4 years in. It had to have practical bandwidth. So we talk about high bandwidth or ultra high bandwidth. Like, what matters is that for the task that you're after, there is practical bandwidth that allows you to effectively do that thing, whether that's cursor control or typing or robotic arm or maybe in the future vision. And it has to be usable at home. It can't be something that you go into a clinic at the hospital for 2 hours a week and under tight supervision of technicians plug you into the amplifiers and turn it on. It has to be something that you can live with. And so 2.5 years ago, we were nowhere close to any of that. This is a photo of some of the prototypes that we've gone through over that time. So we started on the far left. That's an entirely passive board that has 64 electrodes on it and connects to connectors that go to big external amplifiers. And then we added integrated electronics with our first custom chip. That's also 64 channels. And then there's a big leap to the device that Elon showed a photo of earlier. That has 3,072 electrodes in a fully implantable package with just a USB-C port coming out. And then we took a step back in channel count because remember we have to optimize safety, longevity, and bandwidth all together. And so in order to optimize some of those other things, we moved to an easier to manufacture system that has 15, 36 channels and a USB-C port. And those last two are the focus of the paper that we released today. And so we've learned a lot from these. We've recorded a lot of data through these. Like these are actually used every day at Neuralink to record neural data and work with it. And they taught us a lot about the architecture that we think was the basis for our first human product that we're calling N1. And the central component of that is the N1 sensor. It's a little hermetic package. When it's fully assembled, this is missing an outer mold. It's into an 8mm diameter, 4mm tall cylinder. And each of these has 1024 electrodes, and we can stim and record through every one of those channels. Opening it up a little bit, you can see there's the thin film, which has the threads that Elon talked about, which is the wisp going off to the side. There's a hermetic substrate, and then that gets welded later to a package that goes over top, and that's mated to our custom electronics. And we'll go into more detail. We'll have the technical leaders that work on each of these talk about these in more detail over the rest of this presentation. So yeah, I mean, this is just not to belabor the point. I know that Elon really hammered this in, but these things are very, very small. They're not. You can't manipulate these. This is one photo. This is not two photos.
Zasilany człowiekiem.
Joined together. And you really can't manipulate these with your hand. That part at the top is just a backing material that's surgical packaging. They're peeled off. The threads are peeled off that one at a time by the robot to place into the brain. And we had to build a surgical robot. And the first impetus for this is just you have to place these threads. You can't manipulate these threads. You need a robot. And then that grew into understanding where the blood vessels are and imaging into the tissue, and the surface of the brain moves because you're breathing and you have a heartbeat. And there's
In this paper, 2 people with tetraplegia, that is 2 people who were unable to move their arms or their legs in any functionally useful way, were able to control a prosthetic or a robotic arm simply by thinking about the movement of their own paralyzed hand. And they did that using the investigational brain gate.
To jest system, technologia, która ma kilkanaście lat. I ta kobieta steruje tym myślami.
Able to move their arms or their legs in any functionally useful way. We're able to control a prosthetic or a robotic arm simply by thinking about the movement of their own paralyzed hand. And they did that using the investigational brain-gate neural interface system. So they thought about using their own arm and hand as though they were reaching out themselves with their own limb, and the robotic arm moved much the way their own arm would have moved. One of the long-standing questions, not only in neuroscience, but in neurorehabilitation, is whether the cells in the motor cortex and other parts of the brain, whether they continue to function the same way years after that original injury.
To była technologia BrainGate 2, a w zasadzie to był BrainGate.
There's lots of complexity of dealing with this incredibly.
I zobaczcie, co Wikipedia mówi na ten temat. BrainGate, interfejs mózg-komputer, BCI. Interfejs pozwalający na bezpośrednią komunikację między mózgiem a odpowiednim urządzeniem zewnętrznym. Celem badań nad interfejsem mózg-komputer są usprawnienie lub naprawa ludzkich zmysłów albo czynności ruchowych. W komercyjnych celach technologia dostępna jest np. jako zamienniki joysticka lub klawiatury. Historia interfejsów mózg-komputer rozpoczyna się od odkrycia przez Hansa Bergera aktywności elektrycznej w mózgu oraz rozwoju elektroencefalografii. W 1924 roku Berger był pierwszym, który zarejestrował aktywność ludzkiego mózgu za pomocą elektroencefalografu EEG. Analizując wyniki EEG, Berger był w stanie zidentyfikować aktywność mózgu, taką jak falę alfa, pomiędzy 8 a 12 Hz, znane również jako fale Bergera. Pierwsze urządzenie stworzone przez naukowca było niezwykle proste. Berger umieszczał srebrne przewody pod czaszkami pacjentów. Przewody te zostały później zastąpione przez srebrne folie umieszczone na czaszce pacjenta pod gumowymi bandażami. Te czujniki Berger łączył z elektrometrem Lippmana, lecz jego badania nieodmiennie kończyły się niepowodzeniem. Bardziej wyrafinowane urządzenia, takie jak galwanometr Siemensa z podwójną cewką, który pokazywał napięcie elektryczne rzędu 0,01 V, doprowadziły do sukcesu. Berger analizował powiązania wyników z EEG jego mózgu z mózgami osób chorych psychicznie. EEG umożliwiało wytyczenie wielu nowych ścieżek w badaniach nad aktywnością ludzkiego mózgu i ogromnie przyczyniło się do rozwoju diagnostyki medycznej. W połowie lat 90. pojawił się trwający do dziś gwałtowny wzrost zainteresowania badaniami BCI. Kilku zespołom udało się przechwycić skomplikowane sygnały kory ruchowej mózgu, rejestrując stan zespołów neuronów i używając ich do kontroli urządzeń zewnętrznych. Ważniejsze grupy badawcze były prowadzone przez Richarda Andersena, Johna Donhuiego, Philippa Kennedy'ego, Miguela Nicolelisa i Andrew Schwarza. Corocznie nagroda BCI fundowana przez G.Tech o wartości $3000 przyznawana jest w uznaniu wybitnych innowatorskich badań studentom z Polski w dziedzinie interfejsu mózg-komputer. Jak wiecie, już w 2004 roku w Poznaniu studenci pracowali nad tym interfejsem. Każdego roku znane laboratorium badawcze jest proszone o ocenę złożonych projektów i przyznania nagrody. Jury składa się z przodujących światowych ekspertów BCI rekrutowanych przez to laboratorium. I zobaczmy tą nagrodę BCI. Teraz to było $6000. 12 nominowanych projektów. Wygrana osoba dostaje 3000, drugie miejsce 2000, trzecie miejsce 1000. To są ludzie, którzy tym zarządzają. Tomasz Rutkowski, Dean Krusieński, Mikhail Lebiediew, Jing, Nuri Firat Ins i Krzysztof Guger. Zobaczmy ich oficjalne konto na YouTubie. Uniwersytet Singapurski. Nie ma dźwięku. Wirtualna rzeczywistość. Ktoś bez ręki chyba obsługuje wirtualną rękę.
Our goal was to build a high-performance BCI that can restore communication to people who are locked in by using handwriting motor imagery. Our goal was to build a high-performance BCI that can restore communication to people who are locked in by using handwriting motor imagery. We tested our BCI in one study participant who was implanted with 2 microelectrode arrays in hand area of motor cortex and who was paralyzed from the neck down. Here's how our decoder works. We use multi-unit threshold crossing rates as features. A recurrent neural network decoder converts these into the probability of each character being written at the current time step. The probabilities can be thresholded to emit discrete characters, which we did for real-time use. Offline, we explored using a large vocabulary language model to autocorrect typos. Here's what it looks like in real time when our participant uses the BCI to copy a sentence shown on the screen. Our participant is typing freely and entirely at his own pace. Note that our decoder is fully general in that the user can type any sequence of characters, including sentences that never appeared in the training data. In the next video, we compare our handwriting BCI, shown on the top, to the current state-of-the-art performance for intracortical BCIs, shown on the bottom. In both videos, the user is copying the same sentence. Our handwriting BCI is more than twice as fast as the current state of the art. To our knowledge, the typing rates we achieved set a new record for BCIs of any kind. After 5 days of practice, our participant could type at 90 characters per minute at high accuracies. The raw accuracy achieved in real time was 94.5%. When we used a general-purpose language model to simulate autocorrection, the accuracy was above 99%. Our results show that fast, dexterous behaviors can be accurately decoded years after paralysis, and point the way towards a new type of BCI that can help people who are locked in to communicate faster.
We implemented the electrodes within the residual portion of the
Wszczepili mu elektrody.
He is touching the rubber foot. It was very interesting, like my own leg. First time I feel my leg, I feel my foot.
3 above knee amputees were able to robustly recognize different positions over their prosthetic foot or different closure angles of their knee. They were able to avoid obstacles while walking and
Wizja w 8. Ośmiowymiarowy.
Premier patient au monde à être opéré et avec des implants qui fonctionnent à ce point. Voilà, et à un moment donné, il faut prendre le risque. Et donc je suis parti avec un regard, on va essayer, on va voir ce que ça peut donner. Si ça peut m'apporter quelque chose et apporter quelque chose aux personnes dans mon état, ben, tant mieux.
The Clinatech BCI project objective is to enable a tetraplegic patient to control in real time an exoskeleton or other effectors by decoding brain neural signals from epidural electrocardiographic recording arrays. Building on the innovative wireless brain signal recording device, name we imagine, qualified for long-term implantation, and a multi-limb exoskeleton, we developed an innovative real-time adaptive decoding algorithm. Our BCI decoding platform is composed of 2 main loops. The decoder loops receive brain neural signals and treat them at 10 Hz for online exoskeleton control. The updater loop performs incremental calibration of the model every 15 seconds, based on the new recorded neural signals and associated labels. Our adaptive model is based on a mixture of expert strategy. Each arm, wrist, and hand are associated to a linear adaptive model independent from each other. A classifier based on a hidden Markov model selects the most likely limb to move. As the linear models are independent, each limb control can be iteratively added or modified depending on the patient's improvement. Clinatech BCI platform enables a patient to perform direct neural decoding for 8-dimensional exoskeleton control, including 3D hand movements and wrist rotation for each arm. In addition, the model showed good stability without decoder recalibration over several months. These results are a milestone toward new daily life application or functional rehabilitation for people with severe motor disabilities.
Le but après, c'est de pouvoir tout combiner. C'est de pouvoir marcher, pouvoir utiliser les bras, pouvoir utiliser les poignets, pouvoir utiliser les mains. Et donc arriver à faire tout ça sur le même modèle. Et que je puisse utiliser tout de manière indépendante.
In this project, we propose a novel use of a BCI to treat neuropsychiatric disorders such as
high entropy substrate, and it's not all offloaded to the robot. It's the robot's under the supervision of a human neurosurgeon who lays out where the threads are placed, but it would not be, the surgery is not possible without the robot. And so the N1 implant, we can place, as Elon mentioned, many of these, possibly up to 10. In one hemisphere, for our first patients, we're looking at four sensors, 3 in motor areas and 1 in a somatosensory area, which are connected via very small wires tunneled under the scalp to an inductive coil behind the ear. And that connects wirelessly through the skin to a wearable device that we call the Link, which contains a Bluetooth radio and a battery. And this is importantly the only battery and radio in the implant. So if you take this off, the implant shuts off. And if there's software upgrades or security issues, it's much easier to upgrade the firmware on the pod than it is to try and change the implant. It'll be controlled through an iPhone app. You won't have to go to a doctor's office and have them have an exotic programmer to configure it. And the first thing that you'll have to do is learn to use it. Like imagine if you've never had arms and then suddenly you have an arm and you have to pick up a glass on the table. It's like not a cognitive task. You just like, how do you can't think your way through that. And so it's kind of a trippy experience at the beginning where like patients, at first it just kind of wanders around and then they figure out how to break the symmetry and they learn how to control it. And that's like, it's a long process. It's like learning to touch type or play piano. And so for the first product, we're really focusing on 3 distinct types of control. The first is giving patients the ability to control their mobile device, because we heard from over and over again from patient groups that if you have to have a caretaker around and press buttons for you,
Ten chip, kochani, będzie naszą klawiaturą.
At the point you might as well have them do the thing. You have to get self-sufficient using the devices on your own, and then redirect the output from your phone to a keyboard or a mouse on a normal computer. It'll just show up as a Bluetooth mouse or a Bluetooth keyboard, like any keyboard or mouse that you can use on any computer. And as Elon mentioned, this is a forward-looking statement. There's a whole FDA process we have to go through. We haven't done that yet. This is like, these are aspirations, but we are working as hard as we can towards our first in-human clinical study next year. And again, these are plans, but the primary indication for that will be complete paralysis by upper cervical spinal cord injury. And we're expecting that those patients will get 4 1024 channel sensors, 1 each in primary motor cortex, supplementary motor area, and dorsal premotor cortex, which are 2 motor planning areas, and closed loop feedback into primary somatosensory cortex, which is like when you type or walk or pick up a pen, those aren't visually guided movements. Your body has all these senses of where it is in space and pressure and temperature and lots of other feedback. And we think for really high fluent control, you have to provide that back to the brain for the synthetic effectors also. And of course, fully wireless and able to use it at home. We think that there's a huge difference between something that you get to use 2 hours a week at the hospital versus something that you're living with every day and your brain is adapting to as much as the device is adapting to your brain. And so to bring up the other colleagues, this team is like, I'm incredibly lucky to get to work with this team. We're going to go into a little bit more detail on, we think that decoupling implantation from the electrodes is incredibly important. The reason that you have these issues where things like these tungsten microwires get rejected is they're stiff and they're stiff and sharp and they tear the brain, and they have to be because they have to get into the brain. And so if you can decouple the process of getting it into the brain from what is left there, where it can be much softer and have material properties like the brain and maybe be coated in things that help the brain recognize it as itself, that's really important. And then the thin film polymer leads, the threads themselves, are really cool material science, and we'll go into more detail on that. And then we'll also talk more about the chips, and then a little bit more on just the neuroscience of how information is represented in firing statistics in your brain. And so with that, I'd like to welcome Dr. Matthew Mcdougall.
Thanks, Max. I'm Dr. Matthew Mcdougall. I'm head neurosurgeon at Neuralink. When I'm not at Neuralink, I'm a brain and spine surgeon here in San Francisco at CPMC, California Pacific Medical Center. Before that, I was at Stanford, where I worked in labs that implanted and designed advanced brain-computer interfaces. I originally became a neurosurgeon because I wanted to help people live happier, healthier, longer lives. I've been humbled in practice by how powerless we are to treat many of the most debilitating neurologic diseases. People afflicted with spinal cord injury, schizophrenia, autism, and a host of other neurologic conditions have far too few options. I work with Neuralink because we, for the first time in history, have the potential to solve some of these problems. Before we get...
Postanowił współpracować z Neuralinkiem Bo chcę wyleczyć ludzi. Chcę, żeby ludziom było lepiej, żeby byli szczęśliwsi, żeby dłużej żyli.
To how we get the device in, we have to talk about our guiding principle at Neuralink. It's safety. Everything we do at Neuralink is filtered through the question, will this make me more likely to want to get one? Will it make me more likely to recommend this to my family and friends? This approach impacts every design decision we make. So while
Poleca to swoim dzieciom i żonie.
for the immediate future, Neuralink's devices will only be intended for patients with serious, unmet medical needs. Our design philosophy is that this should be safe enough that it can be an elective procedure. So what have we done to try to make it safe? For starters, we've created very small threads. They displace a lot less tissue than the traditional methods. In my regular practice today, I routinely implant large deep brain stimulator electrodes into the brains of my patients. They're big enough to have about a 1 in 100 chance of causing a significant hemorrhage. They displace and disrupt enough brain tissue that you can often see neurologic consequences just from placing the wire. We can do better than that. Neuralink's threads are so thin that they're difficult to see with the naked eye. They're much smaller than the width of a human hair. They're small enough that a human surgeon can't actually implant them without help. So we created help. Neuralink developed a tool that we're extremely proud of, the Robotic Inserter. Inspired by designs conceived of in labs here in the Bay at UCSF and Berkeley, we developed this robot that can rapidly and precisely insert hundreds of individual threads representing thousands of distinct electrodes into the cortex in less than an hour. This tool allows a surgeon to aim between
Strzykawka, która jest w stanie podłączać nanoprzewody do naszego mózgu. Tak małe, że nie widać ich gołym okiem.
the blood vessels that cover the surface of the brain with micron scale precision. The region of the brain shown in this video represents only a few millimeters of surface of the brain. As you can see, the brain's surface moves with the heartbeat and breathing. The robot tracks and adjusts for this movement. Using this tool, we can greatly reduce the risk of harming cortical vessels and causing bleeding. Here, the robot is selecting individual electrode threads and placing them into the brain in the pre-planned location with remarkable accuracy and repeatability. Using this system, we've been able to rapidly place thousands of electrodes into the cortex without causing noticeable bleeding. We also have an in-house histology team that examines brain tissue to help us choose electrode profiles and materials to help us minimize tissue damage. When you think of traditional neurosurgery, you probably think of something very invasive. Traditional surgery on the brain isn't something that patients ever look forward to or are excited about, except in the most dire circumstances. Usually a clamp is attached to the skull to keep it rigidly immobilized to the operating table. We often shave all or most of the patient's hair. Patients can end up with large visible scars. At Neuralink, we want to create an entirely different patient experience, something more like LASIK. No scars, no big scars, no hospital stays, no short procedures, no hospital stays, very short procedures, and of course, in the end, you get to keep all your hair.
Nie wie sam, co czyta. Ale pewnie będą w stanie to zrobić w ciągu kilku minut. Ludzie będą musieli ustawić się w kolejce w specjalnych namiotach.
We even want this to be possible under conscious sedation. That means you can get rid of the complexity and the risk of general anesthesia, as well as many of the unpleasant side effects, nausea, sore throat from a breathing tube. To be absolutely clear, Our first clinical trial patients are going to receive an experience much more like traditional neurosurgery. But our aim is to simplify the procedure, down to the injection of local anesthetic, a very small opening in the skin, a painless opening in the skull below, quick and precise placement of threads into the cortex, and then we fill that hole in the skull with the sensor, allowing the scalp to be closed up over it. Behind the ear, we'll make a small incision to insert the coil. We will tunnel tiny wires under the scalp.
Sensor na czaszce, wszystko podpięte do mózgu i sparowane z waszym telefonem.
To connect the sensors to the coil. That's the process. I believe that Neuralink is going to be able to provide us in the medical community with a platform that can finally enable us to treat some of these very difficult to treat diseases, also to understand them better. I hope you find this as exciting as I find it. If you feel you might be able to help us, don't hesitate to contact us. To talk more about the technology behind all this, I'd like to introduce Vanessa Tulosa, director of our Neural Interfaces group.
Można do nich dzwonić i rozmawiać na temat tej technologii.
Hi, I'm Vanessa Tulosa. I lead the Neural Interface group at Neuralink. Our team consists of engineers and materials scientists who are responsible for making the probes that get implanted into tissue, the packaging for the electronics, and integrating these two components together. We also do all the testing and characterization of these parts. Before joining Neuralink, I led a neurotech team at Lawrence Livermore National Lab. There we worked on a wide range of neuroprosthetic technologies that were used both in the academic and clinical settings. I decided to join Neuralink because I saw an opportunity to take all of this exciting work that we were seeing in neurotech research and actually make them accessible to patients at a much faster time rate than what medical device companies have traditionally been able to do. With that in mind, at Neuralink, we set out to create a fully implantable neural interface with
System jej się chyba zawiesza.
thousands of channels that are capable of single spike resolution. This device must last a long time in the body. To do this, it must be small, flexible, and made of biocompatible materials that will minimize the brain's immune response. To protect the electronics from the caustic environment of the body, it must have airtight packaging, also known as hermetic packaging. The device must also be able to both record from and stimulate neurons. This is essential for a highly functioning BMI. Finally, the manufacturing process must be scalable and capable of making micrometer-sized features consistently. Currently, there are no research or commercial devices that meet all of our requirements. So we built one out of microfabricated thin film polymers. Just like in semiconductor chip manufacturing.
Czego brakuje grupie trzymającej władzę, żeby zamienić ludzi w roboty? Brakuje właśnie tego chipa Elona Muska. To nie ludzie będą myślami sterować zdalną ręką. To system będzie przez chipa sterował ludźmi.
We use a layer-by-layer process that generally consists of 3 repeating steps. We're either always depositing material, patterning a material through photolithography, or etching away a material. Depending on the complexity of the design, these steps could be repeated over 100 times. And to make things more challenging, we are limited to materials that are safe for the body. In our current design, we have a 3 metal layer process that results in a 5 micron thick and 10 to 40 micron wide probe. To give you an idea of how small this is, red blood cells have a diameter of about 8 microns. And an average strand of hair is about 100 microns. Yet in this small footprint, we're able to fit our electrodes, our wires, and the insulation for each of those wires. With microfabrication, we can drive features down to the size of an electron beam. So this is great because we want to make our probes as small as possible. Essentially, we want it to be invisible to the brain. But there are other factors that limit the size of our probes. For example, as we make the wires smaller, it increases the resistance of those wires. And as the resistance increases, it makes it more difficult for us to separate our signals from our noise.
I get extremely attached to the animals.
I definitely get attached to the animals. Yeah, they're really cute.
We want to be more kind. We want to be more humane. People coming into the field now are really pushing that.
I'm one of the people who makes the devices using my hands. I'm constantly thinking that this is gonna go into Barbara, or this is gonna go into Cleo, and we know their names, we've seen them.
Our animal behavior team is fantastic. My job's so much better because I can rely on their expertise.
One of my jobs is to help design behavioral plans and training plans for the animals that we use in behavioral research. Make sure that the spaces that they're in are comfortable and designed in such a way to express that full behavioral repertoire.
I oversee all facets of the animal care program, from the day-to-day husbandry, food, water, provisions for these animals, to ensure that these animals are always looked after to the best of our ability.
So we actually have a committee here that we've developed.
To są świnie Elona Muska, które chipują i są dumni i twierdzą, że bardzo dobrze zajmują się zwierzętami.
It meets regularly, talks about ways that we can try to prevent compassion fatigue so that every day when we come in, we have the energy that we need to provide good, loving compassion to the animals that we work with.
Pigs are a model that actually approximates humans in some interesting ways in terms of size, biomechanics of the skull. They're very adept at exploring their environment, using their senses, their sense of touch with their snout in particular. We can tap into that part of their brain and decode those intentions.
It's totally amazing to see what they're able to do with training, all with positive reinforcement.
Positive reinforcement is where you offer an animal an opportunity to form a behavior and be rewarded for it if they choose to participate in it. We do give them the option of not participating. We'll do reinforcement preference testing.
And if you look into any other field where animals are looked at, whether that's the food industry, the pet industry, you're not going to find any other area where there's multiple dedicated veterinarians, veterinary technicians, animal care, behaviorists, all looking at an animal every single day.
I got into this field probably as an inspiration from my sister, who is on the autism spectrum. It made me look at all
Twierdzą, że najlepiej zajmują się zwierzętami ze wszystkich organizacji, ponieważ wiele osób każdego dnia zajmuje się tymi świniami. Zapomnieli tylko o tym, że trzymają je w budynku, w klatkach. Wiercą im w czaszkach. Podłączają się do ich mózgu, kradną ich sygnały.
life forms that were struggling and challenged to have their own voice heard. And so I wanted to be in a position where I could bridge that opportunity to communicate with the world.
I really feel that Neuralink supports animal welfare and allows us to have a voice for them.
I feel really proud that I get to be part of making their lives and that contribution better.
Elon Musk. Co jeszcze wymyśli? I czy to są jego pomysły? Czy ktoś mu je podsuwa? Czy Elon je kradnie? Zaraz tu był chyba, tak, tutaj jest utwór chroniony prawami autorskimi. Trzeba wyciszyć. To były świniodziki, twierdzicie? Tak chyba produkują te chipy. Trochę za szybko, podwójna prędkość. Cały czas tylko sczytują fale mózgowe. Zapisują, analizują, przypisują. Patrzą, skąd się biorą, gdzie idą, co oznaczają. Przechodzimy do kolejnego materiału. Jeżeli chcecie całości poprzednich, to będą na Discordzie. Czekamy na sygnał od Elona. Wszystko już zafoliowane, bo jest 2020. Wszyscy zamaskowani.
All right, welcome to the Neuralink product demo. I'm really excited to show you what we've got. I think it's going to blow your mind. So the primary purpose of this demo is actually recruiting. So I'm going to emphasize this at the beginning and then again at the end. We're not trying to raise money or do anything else. The main purpose of this is to convince great people to come work at Neuralink and help us bring the product to fruition, make it affordable and reliable, and such that anyone who wants one can have one. And so I want to emphasize the purpose of Neuralink. Like, what's our goal? Our goal is to solve important spine and brain problems with a seamlessly implanted device. So you want to have a device that you can basically put in your head and feel and look totally normal, but it solves some important problem in your brain or spine. And the reality is that almost everyone over time will develop brain and spine problems. These range from minor to very severe. But if you live long enough, everyone's going to basically have some kind of neurological disorder. And these range from memory loss to brain damage. But the thing that's important to appreciate is that an implantable device can actually solve these problems. I think a lot of people don't quite realize that. But all of your senses, your sight, hearing, feeling, pain, these are all electrical signals sent by neurons to your brain. And if you can correct these signals, you can solve everything from memory loss, hearing loss, blindness, paralysis, depression, insomnia, extreme pain, seizures, anxiety, addiction, strokes, brain damage. These can all be solved with an implantable Neuralink. This is an extremely fundamental thing, and I think a lot of people don't quite understand that. The neurons are like wiring, and you kind of need an electronic thing to solve an electronic problem. So current medical research, we'll just go through what is the state of the art in medical research, and then what's the state of the art in what consumers or people in general can get. So the current medical research has shown that you can read neurons in a human's brain. So there's something called the Utah array, which has about 100 channels per array. But it's like, kind of like it's a bed of rigid spikes that's literally inserted with an air hammer. So, you know, that's slightly discomforting, I think. And there's wires and a box on your head, and so it's some infection risk. And obviously, it will look pretty weird if you walk around with boxes on your head. And in order to use it, you have to have an expert medical professional there, and it's only been done in a few dozen people. So, but it is served as an important proof of concept that this can be done. So, we did want to point this out and show that this actually does work. It's just not something that the average person could use effectively. And then in terms of what is currently available, there is something called deep brain stimulation, where they put electrodes, a small number of electrodes, in your brain, and will actually zap your brain with an electric current. And it's valuable for its uses, but it can't read or write high bandwidth information. I would say this is sort of a bit like sort of kicking the TV, which does work, but not always, and it has limitations. Nonetheless, this has greatly helped over 150,000 people, and it's actually, just despite being somewhat of a brute force approach, it has been very effective for a lot of people, and this is what's currently available. So we want to radically improve this by multiple orders of magnitude, improve it by a factor of 100, then 1,000, then 10,000. So going into the Neuralink architecture, what we've done over the past year is dramatically simplify the device. So about a year ago, we had a device which had multiple parts, including a piece that had to sort of sit behind your ear.
To już była przeszłość chyba. Teraz mówi, co było kiedyś. Teraz wystarczy, że wstrzykniemy ci chipa uchem albo nosem. Zobaczmy, co powie.
And it was complex, and you wouldn't still look totally normal. You'd have a thing behind your ear. So we've simplified this.
Nie wyglądałbyś normalnie, no bo byłoby widać za uchem, że jesteś zaczipowany. Dlatego uprościliśmy to. Nic nie będzie widać. Nie będziesz wiedział, że jesteś zaczipowany.
To simply something that is about the size of a large coin, and it goes in your skull, replaces a piece of skull, and the wires then connect within a few centimeters or about an inch away from the device. And this is sort of what it looks like. So, yeah. This is our little device. That thing at the bottom is just to hold the threads in place, because they're just like little fine wires. I mean, frankly, to sort of simplify this, what we're, I mean, it's more complicated than this, but it's, in a lot of ways, it's kind of like a Fitbit in your skull with tiny wires. So, that thing at the bottom is just to hold the threads in place.
W jaki sposób zmuszą ludzkość do zaczipowania się chipem Elona Muska. Piszcie, co myślicie. Czy będzie to zakaz wstępu na basen bez chipa? Zakaz wstępu na masaże. Masaże tylko dla zaczipowanych.
Because they're just like little fine wires. I mean, frankly, to sort of simplify this, what we're, I mean, it's more complicated than this, but it's, in a lot of ways, it's kind of like a Fitbit in your skull with tiny wires. So.
Jeszcze dodam, że oglądamy prezentację, która ma zaledwie miesiąc. To są najnowsze wynalazki Elona. Wszystko zbiega się w czasie. Z międzynarodowym dokumentem tożsamości. Ze strachem. Z propagandą telewizyjną. Nie będę teraz wymieniał tych słów. Ale wiecie, o czym mówię.
And it's, yeah, so our current prototype, version 0.9, has about 1,000 channels. So that's about 100 times better than the next best consumer device that's available. And it's a 23 millimeters by 8 millimeters. It actually fits quite nicely in your skull because your skull is about 10 millimeters thick. So
chcemy wam to wwiercać do mózgu takim specjalnym mikroskopem. I tak się akurat składa, że jest to najlepsze urządzenie dostępne na rynku. Nie ma nic lepszego. Najlepsza technologia.
It goes flush with your skull, it's invisible, and all you can see afterwards is that there's a tiny scar. And if it's under your hair, you can't see it at all. In fact, I could have a Neuralink right now, and you wouldn't know. Maybe I do. So, and it's also got all the things that you would expect to see, the sensors you'd expect to see in a smartwatch or a phone, like inertial measurement, temperature, pressure. So there's actually a lot of functions that this device could do related to monitoring your health and warning you about a possible heart attack or stroke or other damage, as well as sort of convenience features like playing music. You could do a lot. It's sort of like if your phone went at your brain or something. Yeah, maybe that's not a great analogy. Anyway, so it's also inductively charged. So it's charged in the same way that you charge a smartwatch or a phone. And so you can use it all day, charge it at night, and have full functionality. So you would really, it would be completely seamless. And yeah, no wires.
Bezprzewodowa ładowarka chipa, obsługa w smartfonie, wyłapywanie myśli, zapisywanie snów. Można będzie sobie osobowość do pliku zrzucić i ją zabezpieczyć.
In terms of getting a link, so that, you need to have the device, a great device, and you also need to have a great robot that puts in the electrodes and does the surgery. So you want the surgery to be as automated and as possible, and the only way you can achieve the level of precision that's needed is with an advanced robot. So we're really looking for great people who can help develop both the device and the robot. And we feel confident about getting the link procedure, the installation of a link, done in under an hour. So you can basically go in the morning and leave the hospital in the afternoon. And it can be done without general anesthesia.
Bez nieczulenia w ciągu jednego dnia mogą was zaczipować.
And the only way you can achieve the level of precision that's needed is with an advanced robot. So we're really looking for great people who can help develop both the device and the robot. And we feel confident about getting the link procedure, the installation of a link, done in under an hour.
Poniżej godziny. Instalacja trwa poniżej godziny.
So you can basically go in the morning and leave.
A ty jak? Żyjesz bez łącza? Niedługo we wszystkich filmach główni bohaterowie to będą mieć. Dzięki temu będą mogli mieć dostęp do Google'a bez wstawania z kanapy.
The hospital in the afternoon, and it can be done without general anesthesia. So in terms of getting a link, like I said, it's essentially you open a piece of skull, you remove about a coin-sized piece of skull, and then the robot
Wiercisz dziurę w czaszce.
Inserts the electrodes.
Robot instaluje elektrody, łącza.
We'll talk more about that later. Then the device replaces the portion of skull that was removed, and we.
A to, co trzymał w ręce, będzie mieściło się w tą dziurę, którą wywiercą.
We basically close that up with actually super glue, which is how a lot of wounds are closed, and then you can just walk around.
Może człowiek jak będzie spał, to koło głowy sobie to na ścianie zamontuje taką ładowarkę i podczas snu będzie się ładował chipek.
Around right afterwards. It's pretty cool. So this is our surgical robot. And we actually ultimately want this robot to do essentially the entire surgery. So in everything from incision, removing the skull, inserting the electrodes, placing the device, and then closing things up and having you ready to leave. So we want to have a fully automated system. And to be clear, this robot does actually work. We've used it for all of the implantations. So this shows you.
Elon Musk twierdzi, że ten robot działa.
Sort of close-up view, which I think is actually not too gruesome, of the electrodes being inserted in the brain. And if you look closely, you will see that it's a little counterintuitive that if the electrodes are inserted very carefully, that there's no bleeding. And so if you have very tiny electrodes, and if they're inserted very carefully,
nie ma żadnego krwawienia mózgu, jeśli precyzyjnie wbijasz te przewody, które są mniejsze od włosa.
So the robot actually images the brain and makes sure to avoid any veins or arteries so that the electrodes can be inserted with no noticeable damage. So you will have no noticeable neural damage in inserting the link. Yeah, like you sort of think like if you stab something with a wire, surely it will bleed, but actually at a really small scale, it does not. So does it actually work? And what I'm excited to show you, I call it like the Three Little Pigs demo. And if our animal handlers, we're bringing out the pigs, and what we're going to show you is a.
Teraz zobaczycie dowód, że to naprawdę działa. Zapraszam 3 świnie.
Well, I'll walk right over and show you. So what we have in pen number 1 is Joyce, and she does not have an implant. Obviously healthy and happy. We're trying to get Gertrude out, and this is how you know it's a live demo. She's like, she's trying to eat something in the corner of her pen. Come on, Gertrude, let's go. Snacks are this way. Oh man. All right, we'll wait. We'll give Gertrude a second, and we'll move on to Dorothy. Sometimes the pigs are a little shy. So here's Dorothy. And in the case of Dorothy, Dorothy used to have an implant, and then we removed the implant. So this is a very important thing to...
Pierwsza świnia nie miała chipa. Druga świnia nie ma chipa, ale kiedyś miała, ale jej wymontowali. I zobaczcie, żyje, rusza się.
Demonstrate is reversibility. So if you have a
Jeżeli nie będziesz pewnego dnia chciał już chipa, to możesz sobie go normalnie wyciągnąć i nie będzie żadnego krwawienia.
Neuralink, and then you decide you don't want it, or you want to
Będziesz taki sam jak wcześniej.
get an upgrade, and the Neuralink is removed. Is it removed in such a way that you are still healthy and happy afterwards? And what Dorothy illustrates is that you can put in the Neuralink, remove it, and be healthy, happy, and indistinguishable from a normal pig. Oh, thanks, Dorothy. Man, Gertrude, are you serious? Okay.
Teraz świnia numer 3.
Well, should we bring them all out or something? Would that be better? How about everyone just comes into this pen? And we'll have a few, it'll be a little crowded, but whatever. Okay. All right. Well, is Gertrude still back in the thing? Yeah. Okay, we need to bring Gertrude out. Yeah. Oh, the beauty of live demos. This is real live demo. All right. Maybe we can zoom in to do Gertrude or something. She's clearly very interested in something at the back of her pen. Can you see her? Or? All right.
Problemy techniczne.
This might take a sec.
Trzeba ją zaprogramować. Zrestartować trzeba tą
Well,
świnię.
this worked earlier. All right, well, what if we lift the curtain and then zoom in? All right, here we go. Great. Okay, great. Okay, this is a
Zaczipowana świnia jest nie do opanowania.
high energy pig. All right, Gertrude, thanks for
Świnia wysokoenergetyczna.
coming out. So what the beeps you're hearing are real-time signals from the Neuralink in Gertrude's head. So this Neuralink connects to neurons that are in her snout. So whenever she snuffles around and touches something with her snout, that sends out neural spikes, which are detected here. And so on the screen, you can see each of the spikes from the 1,024 electrodes. And then if she snuffles around, touches her snout in the ground, or you kind of feed her some food, pigs love food, then you can see the neurons will fire much more than when you're not touching the snout. And that's what's making the beeping sound. All right, cool. So as you can see, we have a healthy and happy pig. Initially shy, but obviously high energy and
Elon specjalnie pokazuje niebieskie szlaczki. Pokazuje dźwięki, puszcza nam dźwięki 8-bitowe. A przecież dobrze wiemy, co to znaczy. To są dane. Oni przechwytują dane. Mając odpowiedni system, odpowiednie oprogramowanie, Z tych danych są w stanie zbudować całą świnię.
Kind of loving life, and she's had the implant for 2 months. So this is a healthy and happy pig with an implant that is 2 months old and working well. Yeah. All right, cool. And then we actually have, I hope this works, so we said, well, what if we do 2 Neuralink implants? And we've been able to do dual Neuralink implants in, actually I think 3 pigs at this point, and we have a couple of them here. And we've been able to show that you can actually have multiple Neuralinks implanted.
Możesz mieć kilka takich chipów wwierconych do mózgu.
And again, health.
I Elon wpadł na taki pomysł, a co by było, gdyby 2 takie chipy zamontować?
And happy and indistinguishable from a normal pig. So it's possible to have multiple links in your head and have them all be sending out signals and be working well. All right. Phew. All right, so we just showed you a demonstration of reading brain activity. And let's see, probably see that. As I was saying, each of those dots represents a neural spike, and the blue chart at the bottom is showing an accumulation of neural spikes in that region. So in terms of additional brain reading activity, when we have, say, one of our pigs on a treadmill, pig on a treadmill. It's a funny concept, really. And we take the readings from the neurons, and we try to predict the position of the joints. And so we have the predicted position of the joints, and then we measure the actual position of the joints. You can see that they're almost exactly aligned. So we're able, with a wireless neural implant, to actually predict the position of all of the limbs in the pig's body with very high accuracy. Now, in terms of writing to the brain or stimulating neurons, we also need precise control of the electric field in space and time. We need a wide range of current for different brain regions. Some regions require delicate stimulation, some require a lot of current, and you want obviously no harm to the brain over time. And the way part of the way we analyze the stimulating neurons is with a 2-photon microscopy. I always have trouble pronouncing that, microscopy. And it's very impressive technology. You can actually literally see in real time how the neurons are firing. So the red sort of things are the neurons. The red sort of flashing things are the neurons firing, or I should say the electrodes firing. So the red things are electrodes firing, and then the green are the neuron bodies responding to the current from the electrode. So you can see them lighting up different brain regions. And then by carefully controlling the electric field, you can actually have one electrode influence possibly 1,000 or 10,000 neurons. So although you might only have 1,000 electrodes implanted, you could be influencing millions of neurons. And this is just a similar chart showing stimulation at different power levels. So, like I said, for the initial device, it's read-write in every channel with about 1,024 channels, all-day battery life, recharges overnight, has quite a long range. So you can have the range being to your phone, I should say.
Tak jak mówiłem, zobaczcie, bateria działa cały dzień i ładuje się przez noc. Tylko do 10 metrów, że niby będzie działał bezprzewodowo.
Say that's kind of important thing. This would connect to your phone, and actually the application would be on your phone, and it would be communicating by essentially Bluetooth Low Energy to the device in your head. That's why I say in a lot of ways it is like a Fitbit in your skull with tiny wires. So, and then, like I said, you would not be able to see the device at all. You would look completely normal and just have a small scar under your hair. And we're making good progress towards clinical studies. I'm excited to announce that we received a breakthrough device designation from the FDA in July, thanks to the hard work of the Neuralink team. So I want to be clear, we're working closely with the FDA, and we'll be extremely rigorous. In fact, we will significantly exceed the minimum FDA guidelines for safety. We will make this as safe as possible. Just as with Tesla, while it is legally possible to ship a 1-star car, at Tesla, the only cars we make are 5 stars in every category. So we actually maximize safety, and we'll take the same approach here at Neuralink. And then to emphasize again, what the goal of this presentation is recruiting. We want people who are great at solving problems to join the company and help us complete this device, take care of the animals, write the software, create the chips, and
pomóż nam opiekować się zwierzętami.
And productionize everything. So we need like robotics engineers. I think we also especially need people who have worked on and shipped products. So if you've like shipped a smartwatch or a phone, or any kind of complex electronics or complex device, or advanced medical devices, we'd love for you to contact us and consider working here. So, and a very important point to emphasize is that you do not need to have prior experience on brains. So a lot of people think, well, I couldn't possibly work in Neuralink because I don't know anything about how brains work. That's okay, you can learn, but we need software engineering, we need mechanical engineering.
Możesz u nas pracować nawet jak nic nie wiesz o mózgach.
Electrical engineering, like I said, chip design, robotics, and all the things that a company needs to work. So please send in your resume. Actually, it's not just engineering, obviously everything at Neuralink. So now let's actually move to questions. So we've piled questions that have been asked over the internet, and so we'll do live Q&A. So bring in a bunch of people from the Neuralink team. All right. All right, so if you have any questions, please submit your questions to the Neuralink Twitter account, and we will try to answer as many questions as we can over the next hour. And feel free to ask hard questions, that's no problem, and we'll do our best to answer them. All right, let's move over to the team.
Perfect. Yes, we will continue monitoring questions until the end of the event, so please keep sending them in over Twitter. Elon, do you want to come join us? All right, so the first question is, how is the spike detection implemented? Is it on the ASIC? Is it hardware and software updatable?
Yes.
Co z update'ami? Właśnie to jest najważniejsze pytanie. Co z update'ami, Elon?
Yeah, I can answer that. So I'm Paul. I work, I've had a few different hats. I've worked a little bit on digital chip design, and more recently working on some of the algorithms, trying to decode the signals from the brain. And the spike detection algorithm, there's historically been many ways of detecting spikes. Typically, people will record data offline and then look for characteristic shapes. But here, we're interested in detecting spikes online. And there's a number of simple algorithms that you can do, for example, like detecting just a threshold. And where we've been interested in doing a little bit better than that. So we actually look for particular shapes, character shapes that we think are spikes. And so we're doing this on the chip. It's for all 1,024
Powoli zbliżamy się do końca. Jeszcze posłuchamy tutaj pytań i odpowiedzi geniuszy.
Electrodes. There's bandpass filtering that's happening on the chip. So if you think of these as like little microphones sending audio information, we're basically filtering all of that in real time and then looking for these characteristic shapes. You can configure what sort of shapes you're looking for, and that information is what's being sent out. The raw information coming from electrodes is way too much to send out over Bluetooth. So when you're seeing those beautiful spike rasters on the screen, those are the detections that we have coming straight from the chips.
Got it. And just for everyone who doesn't know, can you just explain at a basic level what a spike is?
Sure. So traditionally, people think of spikes or action potentials as the electrical events that happen in neurons and as the primary form of communication between neurons. And so this is a hysteresis event where you have currents that flow and generate this. You can think of it as being a digital signal, a 1 or a 0 that's being sent in time, where.
Zobaczcie te kagańce, jakie tam mają z sześcioma sznurkami.
Neurons will send that signal to often thousands of recipient neurons.
Awesome, thanks, Paul. So I got a question from Toby on Twitter. He asks, what can be further done to simplify the device installation progress?
So we're working on making the device as small as possible, of course, with the robot taking more and more of the responsibility away from error-prone human surgeons. We're hoping to make the process faster and safer.
Actually, it might be good for people to say, who they are and what they do.
Oh, I'm Matthew Mcdougall. I'm the head neurosurgeon at Neuralink.
Thanks, Matt. Is there anything specifically from the robot that can be done to make this faster and safer and scalable to billions of people?
Yeah, I guess we've started with just implementing, robot manipulating the threads. But we definitely need to expand to essentially doing the entire surgery with the robot. So there's nothing like really, as far as I can tell, fundamentally like stopping us from doing that, sort of like at a fundamental science level. It hasn't been done in the past, I think, probably just because like volumes of surgeries hasn't been needed. But specifically for us to scale up to many hundreds of thousands or millions of patients, we will need to automate like the entire surgery essentially.
Awesome, thank you, Ian. Garrett asks, what are some of the lower bandwidth activities to target first? Is it muscle movement? Is it auditory signals? What level of bandwidth is required for effective use?
So there's a couple of...
Just to say who you are and what you do.
Hi, my name is Joey O'Doherty. I'm a neuroscientist and neuroengineer working on decoding from the brain. So there's some low-hanging fruit that I think can really be impactful to help many people's lives, and that's restoring movement and communication in, for example, a spinal cord injured patient. And there's a lot of antecedents in the academic world where there have been very nice demonstrations of doing this, and we think we can take our technology and really bring that to the home, something people can take home with them and improve their lives.
Fantastic. Gil, there's a fun one next. All you.
Yeah, so we're fielding questions from Twitter, so there's going to be some funny comments. First question is, who are you and what do you do? I'll lead with that. And the question is, can the Neuralink chip allow you to summon your Tesla telepathically?
Definitely, of course.
You heard it here first. That's a definite 100%. Carlos, that is the answer.
Czy będzie się dało prowadzić Teslę tym chipem telepatycznie? Elon powiedział, że tak.
Just one bit of information.
Yeah, it's very easy. That's an easy one.
Actually, Max, this might be a question for you. Like some of the questions we had on Twitter was, how do you see the Neuralink device and the essentially API growing over time and allowing developers to interact with the device?
So there's interesting questions long-term about whether you do decoding on head or on a phone or on a computer. Ultimately, so at 1,000 channels, it's possible to send all the spike data to a phone and do processing there. As this gets bigger and bigger, you're going to be more constrained by the radio, so you're going to want to push more of this on head, and that changes your programming model. But really, the APIs you're getting either bin spikes, or you're getting raw waveforms, and that's like you can consume it basically like an audio feed.
Yeah, it's worth noting, like the lossless compression of the data stream is about 100 kilobits with 1,024 channels.
Excellent. So this one came up a lot, and this particular question is from Yosef, but will this technology ever be used for gaming?
Yeah, probably.
100%.
100%, yeah.
I think that a good benchmark of does it work well in humans is, can a quadriplegic, does it work well enough for them to play StarCraft? I think that's a good functional target.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. We'll pull out back from the Twitter questions that are kind of funny. This is a question for the efficacy of the device. Right now, is the device limited to surface layers of the brain only, or can we go deeper? And if not now, what's holding us back from going deeper into the brain?
We are planning on modifying the device and the robot to be able to sew into arbitrary depths of the brain. Right now, we're limiting ourselves only to the cortical surface.
Będą chcieli zrobić nową wersję 2.0, którą podłączą do innych części mózgu. Będą szczytywać sygnał z oczu, z uszu, a potem nauczą się za nas mówić.
Because that simplifies many of the problems involved with going a lot deeper.
And what kinds of things can you solve on the cortical surface versus when you go deeper?
Sure. So a lot of the low-level processing happens in the cortex in terms of motor intentions, sensory information that comes directly in. So your hearing, your auditory percepts, your visual processing, a lot of that happens in the cortex.
I mean, you could solve blindness. You could solve paralysis. You can solve hearing. You can solve a lot just by interfacing with the cortex. And to be clear, we actually do insert, I guess, about 3 or 4 millimeters into the cortex. So these electrodes are sensing from multiple layers within the cortex. There are deeper brain systems that are underneath your cortex, like the hypothalamus, and I think that is something we'd want to interface with for sure, because that's going to be important for curing things like depression, addiction, that kind of thing, anxiety. But yeah, like I said in the presentation, overall we're aiming for a general purpose device, and really the thing that would change from interfacing with the cortex versus deep brain systems is kind of the length of the electrode. So we just need kind of longer wires and to adjust the robot in order to access deeper regions of the brain.
Wystarczy, że przeprogramują robota, który wstrzykuje te niewidzialne przewody. Wystarczy, że zrobią dłuższe te kabelki i będą mogli podłączyć się do każdego punktu w mózgu.
Awesome. Ian, did you have
now,
anything
I'd say
to add?
the robot is designed, the full length is like 7 centimeters or 8 centimeters.
Yeah, so right now we're designed for like 6 millimeters. The actuator itself isn't actually limited to 6 millimeters. It can go much deeper. That's sort of, in addition to scaling out sort of to the rest of the surgery, also scaling to deeper, which is mostly a sensing problem. So the ability to avoid deep vasculature is sort of an interesting problem that we're working on in the robotics world here. So yeah, lots of cool problems in the robot.
And you're leading robot engineering.
Yeah, sorry, I'm Ian. I lead the robotics program here.
Robot is a man's best friend. All right, next question is, what is the most challenging problem that must be solved in order to meet Neuralink's ultimate goal?
Well, I think one of the hardest problems is kind of, I'd say, material science and especially the installation of the electrodes. What would you say?
Yeah, absolutely.
Also, you want to introduce yourself?
So I'm Felix Deku. I currently lead the microfabrication team.
My team makes up of a group of process engineers and material scientists, and our job is to make the tiny wires, as Elon referred to them, what we call the threads that are implanted in the brain. And of course, the threads are made of conductors and insulators, and choosing the right material that is amenable to the brain and compatible to the brain is something that our team have expertise on, and we work seriously on interface engineering just to make sure that our layers are actually well thought through, well designed, and at the end of the day, when we implant this device, they'll be actually functional for either reading or for writing in the brain.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be important in terms of material science problems, is making sure that the threads, the electrodes, can last for decades in the brain, which is a tricky thing because it's a very corrosive environment.
Problemy z elektrodami. Co zrobić, żeby wytrzymały w człowieku jak najdłużej? Dziękuję wszystkim za oglądanie. Widzę, że widzowie jeszcze są. Mam nadzieję, że Was nie zanudziłem. Napisy nie były w 100% prawidłowe. Ale mam nadzieję, że coś żeście zrozumieli, coś żeście z tego wyciągnęli.
Having a conversation in a crowded room can be challenging. Hearing aids don't help because they don't know who you're paying attention to, so they can't suppress competing talkers. Ideally, a BC...
Kończymy. Jeszcze raz dziękuję za wsparcie. Dziękuję za wpłaty, subskrypcje, łapki w górę, udostępnianie. U mnie się błyska, ale burzy nie widać. Dzieją się dziwne rzeczy. Sprawdźcie dokładnie, może już macie takiego chipa. Może kiedyś podpisaliście jedną zgodę za dużo i wywiercili wam dziurę. Kto wie. Niektórzy się tak zachowują, jakby tak było. Będziemy badać, będziemy odkrywać. Będziemy zajmować się tym, co przemilczane. Nie będziemy powtarzać w kółko tych samych schematów, tych samych słów, które możecie znaleźć na innych kanałach, które uważają się za alternatywne. Jeszcze raz dziękuję stałym widzom, nowym widzom, wspierającym. To już oddzielna kategoria pojawiła się, wspierający. Wcześniej czegoś takiego nie było. Było jedynie wsparcie duchowe. Kończymy, widzowie. Właśnie zaczęło lać konkretnie, czyli jednak burza. Mam nadzieję, że do Was nie dojdzie. Trzymajcie się, nie dajcie się zaczipować i pozamykajcie okna. Czołem drużyna.